So this is the NRO Joint Stats Report, as we like to call it. John mentioned it in his presentation yesterday. This is one of the documents that the 5 RARs produced together, and it shows our IP number resource statistics in a side-by-side format. We update this 4 times a year, quarterly, so this is a little bit stale. It's from 31 December 2016. We haven't prepared the first quarter of 2017 as of yet. And another thing to note is this presentation, I think we first put this together in 2002. Richard was one of the people, myself, Nirani, a bunch of us in the early days, and it's still the same presentation, same data. So we are in the process of revamping, revising this presentation. We hope to have it out before the end of this year. And we're adding a lot more data, a lot more relevant data to today's sort of internet. So this may be one of the last times you see it. Yay. Oh, okay. So the first slide might be one of the more interesting ones. This is the entire IPv4 address pool, and it shows how it's been divided over the years. So looking at the large pie over to the left, that's the total space. I'm going to sort of start to the right with the not available space. There's 35/8s that are being used by the technical community. They'll never be available to use by the RARs. And you can see how it's broken out: experimental, local ID, loopback, private use, and multicast. If you go below that, you'll see that the IANA reserved is 0, so the free pool is completely gone. And I'm actually skipping back up, to the top. The central registry, 91/8s were issued prior to the establishment of the RAR system. So these were the predecessor registries to the 5 RARs. It was, IANA was issuing space way back when in the 80s, and then it was the SRI NIC, then the DoD NIC, and then the InterNIC. So 91/8s were issued then, most of them to the ARIN region because that's where the early growth of the internet was. And then you look in the blue space, the RARs have received altogether from IANA 130/8s. And looking at the blue circle below, you can see how it's divided. APNIC received 45, ARIN 36, AFRINIC 5, LACNIC 9, and the RIPE NCC 35. So this one is definitely out of date because things have changed recently, in case any of you are on mailing lists. But this shows the available IPv4/8s in each of the RARs. And I'll start on the left with AFRINIC. It says they have 1.27, but they made an announcement yesterday that they've actually reached their last /8. Let's see, APNIC has 0.44, ARIN 0, LACNIC 0.018, and RIPE NCC 0.84. The thing to note about this is these numbers fluctuate based on whether or not the RARs get space back from their customers. Sometimes they reclaim space due to non-payment of service fees. Sometimes people return space, and we all get space twice a year from the IANA under a global policy, but that supply from IANA is dwindling, so there's a few more allocations yet to come, but that does make those numbers fluctuate. And the other thing to note is that in these numbers, you are not seeing the space that all 5 of the RARs hold in reserves. We have reserved space for particular policies, and we don't reflect that as available space. In the new slide that we're doing, we're actually going to account for every single address space, and we will tell you what's reserved and what's what and what's available. So it'll be more interesting, I think, in the new slides. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to run through some of these pretty quickly. There's not a lot to say. This one, the thing to note, at least in my opinion, is the growth in the APNIC region starting around 2006, 2007, 2008. There was a real surge of activity, and the IPv4 address space went quickly. And in 2011, that is when the IANA ran out of space. So this shows, so we only went from January 1999 to 2016. We couldn't fit anymore, and quite honestly, in the new slides, we're even going to make this less of a time span because we can't really fit every year. But this is cumulative, and it shows the total amount of space in that amount of time that each of the RARs have issued to their customers. Oh, this is not as good as the other one. This shows ASN assignments to customers, and again, it's just the growth trends up and down. Initially, ARIN was issuing more autonomous system numbers than any of the other RARs, and somewhere around 2002, 5, RIPE NCC started issuing many, many ASNs, and they continue to do so today. Okay, this is the cumulative total in that time frame, how many total ASNs each of the RIRs issued to their customers. And we broke out the 4-byte ASNs. We were tracking this separately because initially they were not being accepted by the community. ISPs were having a difficult time, so we broke them out to show that early on we were not issuing very many of them. And then as we ran out of 2-byte ASNs, we had no choice but to issue the 4 bytes by default. So at this point, all 5 of the RIRs are issuing mostly 4-byte ASNs, and we hear very few problems from our community about the 4-byte ASNs. And this is the cumulative totals for the 4-byte ASNs. This is the IPv6 address space. It's the total pool /0. A /3 has been broken out as global unicast space for the IANA to issue to the 5 RIRs. There's 506 /12s left in the global unicast space. 1 /12 was sort of set aside for technical purposes, documentation, miscellaneous purposes. And then each of the 5 RIRs received a single /12 in October of 2006. And all of us are still working from that original /12, 11 years later. I think some of us are probably able to qualify under the global policy for additional space, but none of us have gone back yet to the IANA. And this just shows the IPv6 allocations. And again, you can see much of the growth is in the RIPE region. Sorry. And that is shown very clearly here when you look at the cumulative totals of the IPv6 allocations to ISP customers. So this is IPv6 assignments to our end user customers. Early on, ARIN and APNIC were the only 2 RIRs that had end user IPv6 customer policies, and so that's in the early days. It was just the 2 of us issuing to end users, and then the other 3 RIRs adopted the same policy. And it was interesting to me to note that in the APNIC region last year, they issued more end user v6 assignments than any of the other RIRs. That is the first year that I've seen that. And these are the cumulative totals, RIRs to end users. And this is, we're looking at the percentage of our members who have both IPv4 and IPv6. And these numbers have grown pretty drastically. We're really happy to see this. 34% of Afrinix customers, members now have IPv6. Almost 53% in both APNIC and ARIN have gotten their IPv6. LACNIC, over 87% of their members have their IPv6 allocations, and in the RIPE region, about 75%. So those numbers are good. And those are just links to the statistics if anyone is interested in doing a little more digging. And that's all I have.
Questions for Leslie? Questions for Leslie?
I was waiting for you.
Hi, Leslie.
Hey,
Chris
Chris.
Hassett. I'm always curious about when we do the IPv4 report, we always accept this thing that IANA has 35/8s that are reserved for some purpose that are never available. Can you elaborate a little bit on why that much space will never trickle down?
John's the techie, but I will tell you that that space is actually in use. It is in use by the technical community, ITF, et cetera. It's not just sitting there. And if John wants to say anything else, he can give you some history.
Which specific allocations are you talking about?
The 35 multicast and loopback testing and all
Yeah,
that.
so the IP address space is a big thing. And some of it is unicast space, global unicast, and that's what the RIRs get to administer. There is a lot of other space that isn't ours to administer that the IETF uses for other purposes, including some space that they use for other purposes like category of space like Class E that they define for future use and then never... You're going to say, correct me, Jeff? Go ahead. Jeff, that some of the space may be dead forever. Some of it may get redefined, and then the question is, can we update all the implementations? Go ahead, Jeff.
Jeff Houston, APNIC. There was an allocation made by ANA reserved for future use, which was, as I recall, an 1/8 or a 16th of the total space, which is a large amount of space. We looked at this as a community in the IETF back in around 2008, 2009. Paul Wilson and I wrote a draft, Vince Fuller wrote a draft. The problem that we found was that you need to recompile almost every piece of running code in both routers and end systems, because there is a code block that says if the address has these bits set, it's up in class E, ignore that packet. Now, we then thought this could be done, or we could work on v6. There's not an infinite amount of energy in this community. What do you want to work on? And the pragmatic view was leave it alone, let it rot. You're only going to alter exhaustion by a few months at most either way. It ain't going to make much difference. Go work on v6. And that was the kind of the background as to why there's that class E space reserved for future use that is never going to get used in any future we understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes. Hi.
Brent McIntosh, Cable and Wireless. Leslie, at the start of your presentation, you mentioned that you're actually looking at putting new data into that presentation. Do you have any idea what that new data is going to be? And also, do you request feedback from other entities other than the Rs on what data that we would like to see? Would you reach out to end customers
Good
to
question.
ask?
That's a good question. I like that. If you have any ideas, we'd love to hear them. We always welcome ideas from the community, so that goes without saying. But as far as the slides, we're going to add a lot more data about transfers. There's so many varieties of transfers going on in all of the regions, so we're going to add a lot of transfer information, and we're just going to re-represent, if that's a word, some of the data that's there already to add more details. So.
Okay,
It
great.
should
Yeah,
be.
and that's exactly what I'm looking at. And also, would this report actually share breakdown by region? For example, allocations done in the U.S., for example, by state, Canada, China. Would you get that deep into the data?
We could. It's something we could look at, certainly. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Owen is in the back?
Owen DeLong, Akamai ARIN AC. One of the data I think would be interesting would be to see how the increases and the mobility of address space through transfers, especially in our RIR transfers, is affecting the fragmentation of the routing pool.
Okay. We'll take, this is being recorded, so we'll remember. Chris?
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris Woodfield, Salesforce ARIN AC. If you go back to the IPv6 allocations, you had a slide that showed that each RIR has so far received 1/12, and then there's a subsequent slide that counts the number of allocations that each RIR has made. I'm curious what percentage of each /12 those allocations represent. If you have any information on that.
It's a good question, and I don't have it off the top of my head. I do know that several of us are well over the 50% mark of the original /12, which I believe is what the global policy says, that it's when we can go back to IANA. But I don't have those numbers right now, and if that's something we should consider for the future slides, we will note that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Alain.
Hi, Alain Durand. To answer Owen DeLong, I started a study to look at the growth of the number of entries into the IR database, the delegated files, and the corresponding growth into the BGP table. And so that's an ongoing study that I've started.
Okay, so you have that available data. Okay, great. All right, thank you for your attention.